All right, so I trust that you guys can see my screen. Hi, I'm Arno Coppens. I'm going to be talking about how to Power BI like a pro. I've also put the hashtag for the dataMinds Saturday in the title slide and my own Twitter handle underneath my picture. Of course, I need to have the right window selected. Yeah. Just gonna say this worked fine like a dozen times, and of course, there you go. So this statement actually comes from the Power BI website. It's one of the statements of intent that they've put there of what they want to achieve with Power BI, and one of the things they want to achieve is to, or overall, they want to empower everyone with the tools to be a data hero. And they have this quote by Simon O. Maybe the O is Scottish, I don't know, Irish. Who says it's really quick for someone with no or little experience or technical background to pick up the tools and start creating things, which changes how they do their own job, which is definitely true. The barrier to entry is very low with Power BI. Having said that, that's usually the case. If things seem so simple, then there's always a catch somewhere, as is the case here. So that's what we will be talking about, which little snags and catches there are and how we can deal with them, so that ideally everyone can Power BI like a pro. The plan for this hour is I'll do a short who's who. First, introducing myself and who I think you guys are, or at least the audience at which I've sort of targeted my story. Then we'll look at sort of a case study, specific scenario, which I'll then use to as a lead up to clarify what I mean with Power BI like a pro and why anyone would want it. Once we've got that covered to sort of have an understanding why we're even talking about this, we can dive into a background, some background info about Power BI. What is it? What are the constituents? And then once we have a graph of that, we can look at, okay, given this this background, what options do we have to deal with the various snags and catches that we've seen before. Then we have time for some demos. I don't know if we can do them all, but we'll just have to see. And after that, there's time for questions. All the way at the back of the slide, I'm not going to cover it in the presentation. There, at the back of the presentation, there's a final slide with useful links. Some of the links are used to build up the story and just generally useful links if you're getting started with Power BI. So let's get started with the introduction. Who's who? Who am I? I'm Arno Coppens. Clearly recognizable. I've been working at OGD ICT-dienst in the Netherlands since 2015 in various roles. And for the last, well, officially since last year, we're a separate team as data office, but I was in the team before we became a separate team as the data platform architect and technical lead. We do the internal data estate for OGD, and we're actually also working on some propositions that we hope to take to market in the course of this year. And once upon a time in a previous life, I used to be a policymaker, and that's actually what I was trained for at some point. So that was my professional background. What do I do when I'm not at work? Since I got into the whole BI scene, I've been quite an enthusiastic follower of the various data communities, Dutch, Belgian, other. And lately I've been a regular at Benny's virtual dataMinds evening sessions, which are always good fun and quite interesting. Other than that, I like tinkering, looking around the house and wherever to see if I can make things better, or maybe not necessarily better to everyone's standard, but more the way I want them to be. With mixed results sometimes. And then when I'm not doing that sort of thing or reading or whatever, I'm a proud cat dad who loves to take the cats and my wife out hiking in the forest. There is a cat in that backpack. You just can't see it because it didn't want to walk. It was just sleeping. So that's me. Who are you? I'm just looking at all of you. I've assumed that you, being the audience of my story, are doers of things. You do things. I've assumed that you're probably not, a data developer, and doing things with data is probably not your primary job or skill set. But you might be an aspiring citizen developer, or getting started in this field, or I don't know, you work in a finance or whatever department, and you want to, or you've been pushed to sort of take on these extra tasks as a power user or whatever. So that's sort of the general profile I was thinking of. And what do you know? Well, since you're only just joining the Power BI party, you don't have to know that much, other than it's good if you have some idea of what Power BI can be used for, and is capable of. And other than that, I think we'll start off pretty basic. So so that, and what do you have? It doesn't matter really. If you have nothing yet, then that's great, because let's see if we can get you started on a proper workflow right away. And maybe you've already made a mess. You've gone from the Excel hell that Kurt was talking about to the Power BI purgatory that I suggested he take up into the map. It's not so much fun for you, but it's also okay. And let's see if we can. Yes, that is when you can call the Power BI pros. But it'd be nice if you don't have the money for that or whatever if you can avoid it, or at least do better before it gets to that point. So that's sort of the general profile that I was aiming at with this story. Click. Yeah. So let's move to the case study. I had a specific scenario in mind that we'll look at first. Then we'll look at what I mean when I say Power BI like a pro. What do I mean with this pro developer workflow? And if you're not a developer, or you don't consider yourself a pro developer, why would you still want one anyway? So the case, the central question in this scenario is how do you find a good workflow? And I've thought up a situation where you can ask yourself, who can help me get a good workflow? And maybe I don't know what a good workflow is, but maybe I have some idea of what it looks like when I see it. So I've made 5 sort of assumptions that are part of the case. You are the power user or Power BI user for your department, and all their Power BI belong to you. So enjoy. And if you do well at it, that's great, because then other people will also actually other departments will also be able to find you, because you're good at it. So you deliver, and people are happy. So good for you. The third assumption is you build it and you maintain it. So this should give you a direct incentive to want to build it properly, because if you don't, it's primarily, or in the first instance, your problem. The fourth assumption is that budgets are tight, so you're largely on your own. This might be due to the COVID situation, but mainly I'm thinking it's probably smaller organizations that don't have the budget to actually regularly get in external consultants or whatever, or have their own BI department. Maybe you're the only Power BI user in your organization, or there's like 3 of you. We're sort of figuring it out together, and there might not be budgets to get a specialist in, or even just get extra assistance. So there's that. And given that you're just joining the party, and you want to start off right, you need some help to get up and running and get it right. And while you're asking around in the organization, who can help me, who knows something about this, 2 names keep coming up time and again, Babs and James. Let's have a look at them. Here's Babs. Well, we're not actually going to look at Babs, but the persona, the profile. She does something with computers. Not really sure what, might be IT or whatever. And she's very friendly, which is always nice. She has about 3 years of Power BI experience, and well, that's 3 years more than you have at this point. And the portfolio consists of about 8 data sets around which some 32 reports have been built that she takes care of. Then there's James, the other name that kept coming up. James does something in the finance department. He's in the finance department. That's what we know. He's also very helpful. He has 4 years of experience with Power BI, and he has a reputation as the go-to fixer, Power BI fixer in the department. And his portfolio consists of about 40 odd reports and data sets that are used throughout the organization in various versions of various files by different teams. So he's done a lot of Power BI stuff as well. So what I would like to do is have a little show of hands, and I've actually thought up a different way to do this. I'm going to type James 1 now and Babs 1, and what I would like you all to do is send a like or a heart to either James 1 or Babs 1, whoever you would ask for help at this point in getting started. So let the liking and loving commence, I'd say. I hope this works. Yes.
Well, perhaps you could first show at whom we should be showing our gestures.
Oh, in the chat. I've put in the chat. I've put James 1 and Babs 1, and just like or love whichever profile persona you would ask for help at this point. How many people are we in the meeting? A bunch more.
A total of 45.
Okay, the numbers are going up now.
Already have about 20 people that have voted yet. I think there's a clear winner.
So yeah, I was going to say. So this is good on the one hand, although I feel kind of sorry for James on his own. But well, maybe we can sort of bring him along as well later on. So that's good because we're going to revisit this. Yay, someone loves James. That's nice. We're going to revisit this question in a minute after I explain what I mean with a pro developer workflow, to see if maybe that has swayed your opinions some way or another. So what do I mean with a pro or developer workflow? To me, that consists at least sort of 3 components, which in no specific order. One is version control, which for now I take to mean knowing what changes in your environment, what changes in your code base between one version to the next. So I know that, I don't know, the name of a specific chart or whatever has changed, or a measure, and or or a new measure has been added or whatever, and the ability to up or downgrade from one version to the next or the previous as required. That's the one component. The next component is source control, which is to me mainly about knowing how things get into production, having some sense of what process the code and the artifacts in your production environment went through before they got into production, and who approved it, how did they get there. It's more than some sense. You want to know how things went from alpha to production. And last but definitely not least is maintainability, which coming from sort of more an enterprise background is sort of at the heart of things, because it really sucks if things are if you're having to maintain unmaintainable code. And I think that sort of centers around two main components, or two slogans, if you will: reuse, reduce, and recycle. Recycle is not so much part of it in this sense, but it's part of the slogan. It's mostly about the reuse and the reduce, which means reuse your code as much as possible. Don't duplicate your code. Don't duplicate your logic, because there's just extra points of failure in your environment. And if you do that, what you probably will end up doing in the process is actually reducing the total amount of code that you have. So they sort of go hand in hand, reusing your code and reducing the total amount of code that you have, because if you reuse it, you don't need as much. The other slogan is build once, break everywhere, and fix once. I think the more often heard slogan is actually build once, deploy often or everywhere or whatever, which in an enterprise environment is also very useful. In this case, I take it to mean I want to write my code once, whatever it is, if it's a data set, a measure, a report, and because I reuse it everywhere, if it breaks everywhere, which sounds worse than it is, because it's better to have it break everywhere in a controlled way, because you know that it's the same thing that's the problem everywhere, and you know that you only have to fix it once. The alternative is having lots of variations of the same code floating around, breaking in all sorts of different ways and interacting in different ways with other bits of code, and then you're fixing things forever and hoping that you're not breaking more things while you're fixing them. So given that sort of what and why, let's have a look at what the situation is now. So I think there are definitely good stories coming out of Power BI, right? I think it's very noble to want to empower and engage people, to get people to engage with their data. And I don't only feel, I've noticed in practice that if you get people to engage with their data and you empower them to do things with their data, they start to recognize the importance of their data. They start to recognize the problems in their data, that it's no longer your problem. They start seeing that actually maybe we should, I don't know, administer our process differently, or just rearrange our process to actually measure the things that we think we want to measure, or improve the quality or whatever. They start feeling the pain as well. And with that, they start to see the potential of how it could be if it were better, and maybe also sometimes how it could be if it were to go disastrously wrong. And as a consequence of all those three factors, they start to appreciate the value of their data. So that's great. I think that's ultimately what we want. And I think another very good thing, if you ask me, is the Power BI product team has been relentless. Like, for as long as I've been in BI, which may only be 5 years, in monthly or faster updates all the time. They're not always features I'm waiting for, but I'm pretty sure there are always features someone's waiting for. And that means that, we might have to wait, but given enough time, a lot of stuff will probably get better. Then there's the bad thing. I do think Power BI, the way it's sort of designed now, there's a risk that you go from the Excel hell that you might have been in before, where you have hundreds of Excel files floating around the entire organization. Some of them nobody wants to touch anymore because they were built by a wizard 10 years ago who's no longer with your company, and everyone's afraid it'll break and, I don't know, curse the whole company if someone touches it. I think that without any prior knowledge, if you sort of hand someone a Power BI desktop client and a Power BI license, I'm a bit worried that the default tooling can potentially lead to problems. So that's also the next point. To my mind, Power BI desktop. Oh, I missed the BI there. Power BI desktop. I don't know. It sort of encourages bad habits, if you ask me, or it, at the very least, it doesn't discourage bad habits. And maybe to some extent, I've not put that on there, but it's still something that I kind of feel that might have to do with sort of a design assumption or choice made years ago that end users and self-service BI users might have different requirements and priorities than enterprise BI developers and data consumers. And to some extent, that's true. They definitely have different priorities. But I think in the pro developer workflow that we just outlined, that doesn't change. The package needs to be different, but the functional need, so to say, the functional requirement, I think, is equally great if you're an enterprise developer, keeping up a large organization, or if you're the power user toiling on your own to keep your little organization afloat in terms of reports and things. And then there's the ugly, because it's not all bad. There are actually, quite a lot of ways and to get to sort of approximate a proper developer workflow. To some extent, they're just not necessarily evident or intuitive, and we'll come to some examples later. So the next one I don't think is going to be much of a surprise. I was going to ask, given what I've just told you, if we repeat this again, this exercise, and we start loving and liking again, has anything changed? It's interesting that Babs one is liked and loved in equal degree. Well, James takes an early lead. That's good for him, anyways. So I don't know if everyone is casting their votes, but we'll just I'll just continue. Babs is slowly making a comeback. So this is starting to get interesting. I don't know if everyone's now voting for James as pity votes because of the earlier round, or these are genuine changes of heart, so to say. To my mind, the obvious or the desired outcome was ask Babs, not because James is not nice, or maybe he's even quite good in DAX and whatever, but with 8 data sets and 32 reports neatly built around those, she definitely has more, control over the environment she's working on than James has with 40 reports and data sets and in various states and various versions throughout the organization. So I think that's good because at least, I don't know, either you guys are already beyond the level of this talk, or at least we know sort of how to recognize a decent workflow when we see one, even if we don't see it explicitly. So having that scenario sort of in the back of our minds, let's dive into Power BI a little bit. We'll look at the building blocks of Power BI, get you some context, and with that context in mind, we'll look at the options that we have. So if you look at the Power BI service, this is more or less all the blocks that are in there. I can't really think of any more major blocks that I didn't take into this slide. So you have the deployment pipelines, which I didn't put in here, but they're a premium only feature. And what they do is they basically help you. It's a form of combined form of source and version control to take your code from a dev workspace to a test workspace to a production workspace, sort of. Then you have, like we said, it does something with a workspace, and a workspace is basically a container that contain all sorts of other artifacts. It can contain data flows. Data flows are sort of standalone in this picture, and a data flow can act as a source for either a data set or another data flow. And basically what it allows you to do is extract some of your transformation logic out of data sets if you do want to sort of duplicate the results, but you don't want to duplicate your code. So for some reason you want those bits of code reused, then you can just put them one step earlier in a data flow and have all the data sets that need to use that bit consume the data flow. These data sets then, what they do is basically they supply data to 0 or more reports. That's actually the Power BI artifact. Of course, you can also connect to a data set from Excel and other tools. But you can have a data set without any reports linked to it, and that's fine. Then it's just a data set, and ideally you would hopefully have someone using it, because otherwise it's useless. But there's no technical requirement to have a data set, have a report with a data set. On the other hand, you can't have a report without a data set. You just can't. And there's always exactly one data set to which a report is connected. And once you have a report that visualizes the data, those visualizations may be picked up by a dashboard that displays those visualizations. And a dashboard can actually take multiple visualizations from different reports and also from external sources. Then you have an app, which is basically the workspace is also called an app workspace because there's a one-to-one relationship. You can publish the content of your workspace as an app. You can choose which dashboards and reports you want to include. You must have at least one dashboard or report in there, otherwise you can't publish the app. And you can also include outside content in your app. You can't directly include a data set, but you can provide access to the data set to the users with whom you shared your report or dashboard through the app, so that they can also connect to the data set and build their own stuff. And data flows completely fall outside of the app experience. This is a slightly different view of the same artifacts, where we look at the artifact, where do they live, what APIs are there, and then the last column are just the URLs for the REST APIs if they're there. If you're really getting started, this is probably not that meaningful to you, so we can just quickly skip through it. The main things are actually the first two columns, which show you that almost all the artifacts are exclusively online artifacts that only live in the Power BI service. I've just, for the purpose of this story, neglected Power BI report server and the on-prem situation. And there's actually only two kinds of assets that you can have outside the service as actual physical artifacts, which are datasets and reports, which in practice are combined in a Pbix or Pbit file, because that's basically the two main components of this file. If you're, building in the query editor in Power BI, doing your Power Query magic, then you're actually building a data model, a data set, and then of course there's just the regular report part of it, where you build your visualizations, your tabs, your slicers, whatnot. And you can actually see this as well. You can see this in a number of ways. When you upload a Pbix file, Power BI actually takes it apart, and you can see them in the service as separate artifacts. You have reports, you have data sets. And if you rename a Pbix file to or a Pbit file to zip, and you unzip it, you'll get sort of the content of the background, the screenshot. And what you see is there's a data model file, which is if you extract a Pbix, there's a data model file which contains the compressed data. So it contains the full model with the data. And if you extract a Pbit file, in place of the data model file, you get the data model schema file, which contains only the schema, the structure of the data. So it's only the data model without any data in it. And then the report component is captured in the report folder, which contains some metadata about themes that you might have used, custom visuals, those types of things. And there is a layout JSON file that actually describes your complete report, which tabs you have, which slicers you have, which visuals you have, how they're configured, the whole shebang. So now that, I don't know, I hope I didn't go too fast for everyone. But now that we know all this, what options do we have to actually get to some sort of good workflow, that sort of proper sort of hygiene, I'd say. Step one, always keep your data sets and your reports in separate Pbix files. This is very much not intuitive to me in Power BI, in the way Power BI Desktop operates. Now it actually sort of encourages you to combine them in one file. And the reason you want to do this is because, like we discussed before, you want to be able to reuse your data sets and build multiple reports over that one data set, rather than having to duplicate all the logic all the time. The way you can do this is when you go to get data, you can actually choose Power BI data sets in the Power BI service as your source, in which case your Pbix file actually will no longer contain a data model file. It'll just contain some metadata pointing it to the right data set. And you get what's known as a thin report, which really only contains the report definition and no data at all. And if you want to do this locally, there's actually an external tool built by the community that you can use to hot swap from a local Pbix file with a data set that you can then use to, if you open it, you can use the external tool to hot swap the data source of a different report, so that it doesn't look at the Power BI service anymore, or whatever the original, may have been another Pbix file, to then connect it to the Pbix file from which you opened the external tool. The advantage of this approach is that it just scales better and it's more maintainable. In theory, if you're reasonably sure that you're not going to get that much reuse out of the data set. You could do it, but really the extra effort is that minimal that I would just vote for don't go there. Just always keep them separate. That way you can reuse your logic, ultimately reduce the total number of data models you're managing, and again, build once, break everywhere, and fix once. So that's the first issue tackled, sort of. Deployment pipelines, those are interesting. I was a bit more enthusiastic about them yesterday than I am today. But if you have Power BI Premium in some form or another, this could be the dedicated or the premium per user licenses that are going GA. They don't solve all the problems. It gives you partial source control. I would also say partial version control in a sense. So that's good. But it doesn't give you the full workflow that you would want. And how you can do this is by assigning workspaces to a premium capacity, either a dedicated capacity or the premium per user capacity. And once you've done that for a workspace, then you can assign the workspace to a pipeline. And once that workspace then becomes your dev workspace, from there you can decide, hey, I want to promote this code to my test environment. And then the pipeline takes care of publishing the code to your test environment, creates a test environment if it isn't there, and the same for production. Why is it partially? Because I've tried this yesterday or the other day, and the pipeline neatly provides test and production environments for you, but you can still go into the production environment if you have the proper permissions and go on and mess up things and change reports and whatever. The pipeline will tell you, hey, something's happened. It's not, it's not in sync anymore. So there is that, but ideally what you'd want is that you don't need permission in your production environment, except for sort of exceptional circumstances where it's clearly audited why you need those permissions and what you're doing. And to my mind, I think if they were building it, they might have just built it and said, hey, we're automating this. So we automate it in such a way that you can't interfere for your own good, especially since this is aimed at sort of the less technical population. Then, how do you say that? In Dutch, we have this term, ontzorgen. Help them by taking it out of their hands. So it's a, I'll just quickly go back. It's a partial solution, and realizing today that the Power BI Premium per user capacities are actually limited to premium per user users in terms of consuming the content, that sort of lessened my enthusiasm a bit. If you have a strictly Power BI premium per user group that it's contained to, then definitely use them. Otherwise, you'd have to still look at how to maybe see if there's workarounds to sort of extract your content out of the premium capacities to other places. But you might run into licensing issues with Microsoft. I don't know. The authorization or the access, do you mean to create a pipeline or to use it? In any case, you'll need premium, either a premium license per user or premium capacity to be able to have them anyway. They're a premium only feature, at least at this point. That's a good point, Benny. Yes. Yeah, I think there are definitely. That's why I said if you have a Power BI Premium in what way, one way or another, then I think use them. It is a valuable feature, even if it's not perfect. It definitely adds value. It's just not going to be for everyone, but that's okay. In terms of creating the pipelines, I think you might. I'm not sure else. I'd have to look it up. Maybe Benny or someone else knows. I think you might need to be workspace administrator or capacity admin. I'm not sure, because you need to have, you need to be able to assign the other workspaces that are being created to the premium capacity. So we can look that up later. What's next? Because as developers, we have Git that we use for most of our code, but that doesn't play nice with binaries. Yes, always listen to Benny. And then, but if you don't have Git, because Git is difficult and for developers, and that's fine, there is an easy way to get some level of version control using OneDrive and or Sharepoint, because these have built-in file versioning just out of the box. You can use it to revert your Word documents, your PowerPoint things, anything, and it also works for PBIX files or PBIT files. You just create a document library or a folder, you put it in there. Ideally sync it with a local folder, so you can just edit it as if it's local, and off you go. The advantage this gives you is partial version control. It's actually really quite easy to revert to earlier versions. I don't know how far back it goes. I think that is some setting that they can configure somewhere, the SharePoint admins. But for most cases, it'll be long enough. I'll get back to the Joris later. It's partial version control in the sense that there's no change log. So you know that things have changed because there's a new version, but it's not going to tell you what has changed, if it's a visual that's been added or a measure or whatever. So that gives us an extra bit of version control if you don't have premium. And then there is deployment automation. This is also, it's part of your source control strategy, I'd say, because if you have automated your deployment, then sort of by definition, you know what the process has been of how that code got into production. So it's part of your source control process. And there's actually a way to sync files automatically from OneDrive or SharePoint to Power BI, so that if you put the file on OneDrive or SharePoint and you connect it to Power BI, you need to do that at the beginning when you the first time you upload it, you want to publish it, and then after that, Power BI will keep it in sync with OneDrive. So if you change the file, then with the scheduled refresh, or I think it checks once an hour, otherwise something like that, it'll check for changes and then pull up the changed code to Power BI. It's a one-way sync. So changes in on the Power BI side are not picked up back the other way, which I think is logical, because if the data set is a PBIX and it gets refreshed in the service, then the data is going to change, and it'd be pointless to keep syncing that back to OneDrive. So again, this gives you partial source control, because you know that at least for that little step from your file storage to that particular Power BI workspace, you know how it got there because you saved it to OneDrive or SharePoint, and Power BI took care of the rest. And the advantage is you don't have to manually publish anymore from Power BI desktop. And the only thing you need to do is the only thing you need to do is arrange the initial import, and after that, it'll just sync automatically. Again, the disadvantage is if you want to manually publish from Power BI Desktop, that's still very much possible. And as far as I know, there's no sort of conflict resolution in this scenario. So that might cause a bit of drift. And unlike the Power BI deployment pipelines that we discussed earlier, they don't automatically cover multiple environments. It's possible, but there's no automated process to do this. I'm not even sure that you could say there's sort of a standard best practice for it, because it kind of depends on, are you deploying a report to multiple targets or just straight up dev, test, prod production. Having said that, I'm quite convinced. I've been looking at some stuff lately, including some of Rui's dirty hacks that he presented in one of the earlier sessions, and I think there are ways to lower the barrier for this process as well using Power Automate. And if you use Power Automate, I mean, you could also do it with PowerShell, but Power Automate will allow you to also do approvals. So you could have a situation where you have a dev folder, and when you're done, you could say, hey, there's a review folder inside my dev folder, and I save or copy the file there, and Power Automate monitors the folder and picks up, hey, this file has been offered for review, and it could maybe, I don't know, post in a Teams channel or send an email to a team for one of your colleagues to review your work and approve it. And then if they click approve in Power Automate, then Power Automate will automatically transfer it to the next environment where you can do your user acceptance testing, that sort of stuff. So I think it's possible. It's just that it's not necessarily going to be pretty, and no one has done it yet. Minor detail, but the building blocks are there. So I see I have only 10 more minutes left. I had a bunch of demos that we could have a look at if we want. I don't know if there's a preference for any particular one. First come, first serve, I'd say. If no one puts anything in the chat, then we'll just look at the file separation. Okay, that's 1 and 3. Okay, let's look at 1. Let's see. How do I? Okay, I'm just gonna get rid of the presentation because we're pretty much done there anyway. After that, it's just questions. So this is quite funny because I actually have a thin report here that I hope Power BI will go to the right screen. Drum roll. Spoiler alert, it's not going to work because it shouldn't work because the data set it's connected to has long been deleted. I used this for a demo internal demo at OGD in October. So it should give an error that it can't connect to the data set that it wants, which of course is a problem if you separate the data set from the file. Now, of course, Power BI is opening to the other window. Sure, log me in. Okay. Okay. Yes, I get this error. So that kind of sucks. There's not really anything you can do about this at this point directly because the data set's gone and Power BI desktop won't be able to open it. And if you click cancel, then it'll just say unable to open document, which is fine. We understand. We're in a very understanding mood today. So if I have my external tools, I'm doing this the wrong way around. There you go. This COVID old dataset is actually the dataset that it was looking at least a Pbix file of that dataset. So if I somehow manage to swap it out, then it should work again. So as you can see, I've now opened the dataset, which will take a minute to load. If there's any questions while we wait, just throw them out there. There we go. It's kind of slow. I'll go, yeah, I think I need half a year or a year or so, and then I'll get a new laptop, which should be a bit faster. Just waiting it out. There you go. I said it's perfectly fine to have a data set without a report. Power BI Desktop doesn't get this. You will always get an empty page, which is fine. Just for the moment, just keep it empty. Now I go to my external tools tab, and I can select hot swap connections. Just to know more about this, actually go to powerbi.tips, because they have an installer that allows you to install all these external tools that are built by the community in one go. Right now, I'll choose, if you overwrite and connect, it'll overwrite the existing report file that you have. If you choose copy and connect, you can see that I've actually done this yesterday. This was the copy that it made yesterday. I imagine it should now make like copy 1 or copy 2. And I choose COVID report. And we wait a little bit and it should open up another Power BI desktop. COVID report 1. Sure, that works for me. Just wait for the pictures. As you can see, we're not getting an error this time, and we actually see, you know, my employer's corporate styling, and it's loading some stuff. So that's great. So now we fixed this error, so that's also what it's good for. And the process is, if you're developing a new data set, of course, you don't need to, you just leave the tab empty and you go and build your data set in the Power Query editor. If you want to develop a thin report from scratch, just opening another Power BI window. So you can actually see here that what the external tool did was it looked up the local port that the dataset was running on, and the name of the database that was given to the external tool by from the Pbix by Power BI Desktop, and that's how it knew which parameters to feed to this report. Where's my, so now if I'm starting a new Power BI thin report, I can just use the get data experience, or if it's really slow, I can click on get data again there. There we go. I can go to Power Platform and I can select Power BI datasets, and I can click connect. I click connect. How are we for time? Oh, 5 more minutes. So I have actually got a bunch. Here you can see the premium pipelines. This was my original dataMinds workspace that I created, and then the pipeline automatically created a test and a production workspace to go with it. I'm just going to pick whatever. Pick one, and it should now. There you go. There's the model. I was very lazy when I made this data set. I didn't do any proper naming and stuff. The point was versioning and that sort of stuff. As you can see, we're actually connecting to the data, and yeah, I can save as. Just call this thin report demo. Okay. The other question was, I think the demo was the OneDrive and SharePoint versioning. As you can see, these files are actually on my on a SharePoint site in my employer's organization. I've synced this document library locally, and I can actually right-click and click version history. And of course, then it opens on the other screen. And I can see here that, hey, there is a previous version of this report, which was, actually, I think there is no previous version of this report, but there should be previous versions. If there are, I can quickly check one of the other ones. This one was, I haven't been modifying them enough for you. Nope, they're all brand new because, you know, I wanted to have properly working demo files. Yeah. We can also actually just quickly view online, show you what it looks like if you go to SharePoint to look at this. And then I think we're out of time, and we can maybe cover some questions that people might have in the meantime. I must say that this is not a place where you can find me that often. It's been a while, but here you go. If I click the ellipsis in the document with the file, I can just go to version history, and then SharePoint starts thinking. And there's only one version. You can see when it was modified. You can see by whom it was modified. There's a comments thing there. I don't know how people add comments to this. Maybe if you do something, some custom process with Power Automate or whatever. Or if you start commenting after you save your versions, which is less than ideal. And then normally you should be able to select a version and revert to it. Here you can see you can view that version if you want to view it before you want to restore it. And if you are sure that you want to overwrite, then you can just click restore. And normally you'd have a longer list of versions. I think that has hopefully fed both those birds with a tiny little scone. And then, I don't know, Joycelyn, does that answer your questions?
Okay. Yeah, I think you take all of the most stringent questions already, and you demoed them at the end, so it was very, very useful, I think. So yeah, I don't know. Thanks a lot for the thorough Power BI walkthrough. Yeah, me personally, I like to drill through on Power BI versioning, and of course, yeah, the interactive voting part was between Bob's and James. Glad to see the number of PT voters allowed James to still go home with his head high as well. So that's
Everyone's
really
a winner
good
here.
to see. Yeah, yeah, good to see that that some people do restore the balance in there.